Hello everyone, Jeff with the Green Review here. The environment itself may not be capable of supporting certain plants in the plant to environment balance. Sometimes we can fix the environment, and sometimes we need to change the plants to ones better suited to the environment. Poor soil will affect every plant that has to grow roots into it. Good, deep soil helps keep plants in the thrive range, while poor soil immediately puts a plant into the survive range or slow death range. If the soil is too shallow, there's not enough soil for the roots to keep the plant healthy. This is often the case next to asphalt walks and drives where the base gravel material is wider than the surface pavement. Grass and other plant roots cannot get any water in the gravel when the weather is dry. Ice melting chemicals can also damage the soil and prevent roots from growing near pavement. Crabgrass, spurge, and other annual weeds may be the only plants growing along drives and walkways. The dry, gravelly soil and warm temperatures from the pavement require that plants use C4 or CAM types of photosynthesis that we've talked about in other videos. Excessively wet soils are just as bad as dry soils. The large pores in the soil are filled with water and not an air too often for healthy plant root growth. This moves plants that don't like wet soil down a survival range, even if all the other environmental factors are good. Plants with smaller root systems will have smaller tops and not be as healthy overall, so they'll be more susceptible to disease and insect problems. They're more likely to have root rotting disease organisms infecting the roots, which will eventually kill the plant. In these two pictures, you can see that the honeysuckle shrubs on the left are in drier conditions than the ones on the right, which are near a drainage way. You can also see that they prefer the drier environment. Chlorosis is when normally green leaves turn yellow because of one of many possible nutrient problems. For instance, the old leaves at the bottom of a plant may turn yellow as nitrogen is transferred to the newly forming leaves. Fertilizer will help cure this type of chlorosis. The sudden appearance of yellow on leaves is probably not chlorosis. Iron chlorosis is most common in soil with a pH higher than 7. Lower pH soils are more acidic and have more iron dissolved and are available for the plant roots. In areas where limestone is the parent material for soil, the soil often has a higher pH. If well water comes up from aquifers and limestone, the pH of the water may be higher than 7. High pH water can raise the pH of soil in potted plants and the landscape. Pin oak trees are beautiful trees, but they are commonly seen suffering from iron chlorosis. They must grow in acidic soil to remain healthy. Iron chlorosis has the distinct pattern of the leaf blade being yellow, but the leaf veins in the area around the veins being green. The more yellow there is, the sicker the leaf. Birch trees often suffer from manganese chlorosis in high pH soils. Nutrient chlorosis can be temporarily and possibly expensively treated through direct injections in the tree trunk or spraying the plant leaves and stems with nutrients in a form the plant can absorb, such as chelated iron. The plant will turn green for weeks or maybe a whole season, but it doesn't cure the problem of the soil pH being wrong for that plant. Temporary improvements to lower the pH can be done using sulfur. The pH will rise again in a year or two and the treatments must be repeated. It's much better to plant pin oaks and other chlorosis-sensitive plants in places that are within their thrive range and not just their survive range. Frost damage is obviously caused by low temperatures. It can occur in spring or fall. Many annuals, perennials, and garden vegetables are planted according to the average last frost date of the spring, and in some years that date is too early. For instance, an average last frost date of May 15th develops from some years having the last frost in April and some years the last frost in June. Annuals planted on May 15th will need protection from frost on years when the frost comes in late May or early June. Frozen plant tissue can occur on plants that are usually hardy but were not ready on a particular day. A warm spell can cause plants to not have enough antifreeze chemicals in their cells. When the weather changes quickly, a microclimate next to a warm building or a sunny wall can create enough warmth during the day to cause plants to consume the sugar they normally use for antifreeze. Then at night, the temperature may drop below freezing. When ice crystals form in the plant cells, they expand and break the cell walls and the cells die. And there can also be ice in between the cells as well. The damage may occur in the fall, but not be visible until the following spring. Forsythia flower buds are not as cold tolerant as the leaf buds. The plants bloom at the bottom because snow covered the plant and protected the flower buds. Now you have freeze damage at the top and protected buds at the bottom. Freeze damage occurs when cold temperatures are below what a plant is capable of withstanding. The cold may be just overnight or maybe for several weeks. Plant parts vary in their ability to withstand cold. Roots are often most susceptible. They're normally protected by soil, but if they're planted in a container, they may get too cold for too long. Insulating the pots may help overnight, but it's not beneficial for long-term cold, as the soil and the roots in the pot will eventually still be frozen solid. Plants may be protected from a few degrees worth of cold by covering them with row covers. These cloth covers can add a few weeks of protection in the spring and fall. Be careful using plastic, as it will act as a greenhouse and warm the plants up too much during the day. Snow and ice are good insulators for the soil and plants. They also protect plants from dry, desiccating winter winds. On the other hand, snow and ice damage can smash plants down to the ground. Ice is very heavy and often only comes in one direction, coating one side of a plant and causing the plant to break in half. There are several things you can do to minimize the damage to your landscape. Check multi-stem plants and evergreens to see if they need to be supported before there's a chance of damage from ice and snow. Branches that come off of the vertical trunk and stay almost vertical are at the most risk. Branches that are angled at almost horizontal are at the least risk. Any branch or trunk that has disease problems and is beginning to rot is at a greater risk of breaking. Some varieties of trees, like the common Bradford pear, are almost all branches coming off at a narrow, almost vertical angle. Sometimes they're full enough to have so many branches that no single branch gets too much weight, but at other times the tree just splits in half when you get an ice storm. Salt damage can easily occur when too much is applied to driveways and walks. Ice melting chemicals fall into two categories. They can lower the freezing point of water by forming a solution, which is what chlorides, glycols, sulfates, and urea do. Or chemicals such as acetates can change how water and surfaces bond together when ice forms. Ice melting chemicals cause the liquid water to flow off the road surface, preventing ice from forming on the surface. This moves the chemicals to the surrounding soil. All those salt-forming chemicals commonly used in ice melting products such as ammonium, calcium, chloride, magnesium, potassium, and sulfate are needed by plants, but they will harm plants when high concentrations touch the leaves, branches, buds, and roots. Sodium chloride is commonly found throughout the world and is cheap to buy. It's also the worst possible ice melter when it comes to corroding bridges, harming plants, and running water quality. You may see ice melting products listed with some sort of green environmental labeling, but there are no regulations as to what makes an ice melter green or healthier for the environment. The safest ice melting chemical for use near plants or drinking water sources, and the most expensive, is calcium magnesium acetate, or CMA. It's biodegradable and less corrosive than tap water. It prevents the formation of the ice-to-surface bond if it's applied before the precipitation starts, but it has a high initial cost, but its much lower environmental cost is never taken into account. Just as the extremely high environmental cost of rock salt and other common road salts is not taken into account. CMA is only effective to about 22 degrees Fahrenheit, not colder, but it's often blended with other ice melting salts to make them greener and to prevent corrosion and concrete damage. Another ingredient that assists other chemicals is alpha-methyl glucoside. It's a corn byproduct that speeds melting. Look for products that include CMA or corn byproducts and use as little salt as possible to protect your plants. Drought damage occurs when the plant temporarily doesn't get enough water to maintain water flow through the plant or maintain chemical reactions such as photosynthesis. The plant wilts and some cells die. When water returns to the plant may return to its normal shape, but dead cells remain dead. Leaf tissue farthest from the veins along the edge of a leaf often show the drought damage first. Tender new growth at the tips of the branch die also. It may not be noticed until after the drought is gone, but when diagnosing damaged tissue, the history of the plant can help diagnose drought as the cause. Trees often drop yellow leaves after being exposed to dry or hot weather. During dry weather, they may also drop whole interior branches that receive the least amount of sunlight. Heat damage is caused when the cooling action of the transpiration is not able to keep the plant cool enough. Plenty of water may be available to the plant, but the plant may close the stomates to prevent photosynthesis from using too much of the plant's water. Photosynthesis slows and stops while respiration continues as the temperature rises. Respiration consumes sugars and other plant resources to the point where the plant may not be able to survive. Wind damage often goes unseen. As the plant flexes in gentle winds, cell walls break. The plant responds by growing stronger, thicker cell walls. Strong winds can break branches and trunks outright, and they may also cause branches to bang against each other and to knock leaves and small twigs off. Flooding damage can be in two forms. Plants' roots that are submerged longer than can be tolerated by the plant will die from lack of oxygen in the soil. Any top of the plant that is submerged can also be damaged by drowning. Being covered in enough mud to block sunlight by the leaves and by the flow of water bending or breaking the stems. After floodwaters recede, it may be necessary to wash the mud off of lawns and perennials, replace mulch to prevent weeds, to conserve water, and to prevent erosion. The simple rule of thumb is to remember is that if a plant does not normally grow on the edge of a lake or a swamp, it will not do well being flooded. The longer it's flooded, the worse it'll do. Slow growers or already weak plants will have a harder time recovering from a flood. Blossom end rot is the result of the plant's difficulty moving calcium within the plant. Calcium intake and movement in the plant is regulated by the amount of moisture in the soil. Going from way too much water to way too little water in the soil can result in damaged fruit. The end of the fruit opposite the stem develops a water-soaked area that becomes sunken, brown to black, and leathery. Usually only the first crop of fruit is affected because cold soil also affects how well water and calcium move from the soil into the plant. Remove those damaged fruit and keep the garden watered evenly so that the soil does not go through wet-dry extremes. It can be a problem on tomatoes, peppers, squash, and watermelons. So what does this mean to me? At first it may seem that it would be impossible to prepare for environmental problems in the landscape. However, most of the problems can be predicted. We know what low spots will flood, so we should use plants that are native to hydric shoreline soils. I've seen trees planted around retention ponds that do not tolerate flooding. Why would someone do that? By planning ahead and using plants in their thrive environment, we can prevent or at least limit the amount of damage the environment and people cause to our landscapes. And this is Jeff with a Greener View. Thanks for watching.